Welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to continue working on YelpCamp. We've already done the initial setup. We've done some basic layout, added the header and footer partials. We added Bootstrap in. We added the functionality of creating new campgrounds. Now we're going to go and style the campgrounds page using Bootstrap. So let's get started. Very first thing I'll do is make sure my server's running and just take a look at what we have now. Definitely a little underwhelming. So I have two main goals. The first one is that we want a better header and title up here, so this should look nicer. We're going to use what's called a Jumbotron in Bootstrap. And then also the campgrounds, the list of campgrounds shouldn't just display vertically like this. Instead, we want a grid of smaller images going across, and that grid should be responsive. Let's start with the first one, which is getting this title text to look a little bit nicer. So I'm going to open up campgrounds.ejs, and I'm just going to work in here. So I'm going to resize this a little bit because we're going to be writing quite a bit of HTML and we're not going to do anything with our terminal at all. So to work on the header, we're going to use a header tag, which we haven't seen before. Functionally, it works the exact same way as something like a div. The only difference is that this has a little bit of semantic meaning to it using header rather than just an arbitrary div. But it doesn't really matter, it's just a container. And we're going to give it a class of Jumbotron. And then inside of it, we're going to add in, we'll just copy this H1 actually, and we'll just leave it at that and save. If we go and refresh our page, we now have what's called a Jumbotron. Still not great. The next thing we should do is make everything inside of a Bootstrap container. So everything that we see here, all of this, I'm going to indent, and I'm going to add a div with class equals container, just like that. And then we'll stick everything inside of that. And this will add some spacing for us on the sides. If I refresh, you can see we no longer have things right up against the left side here. We have some space and our Jumbotron is looking a little bit closer. And eventually we'll have a nav bar up here. So this will look a little bit nicer as well. For now, we just have the Jumbotron. Now let's change the text itself. So rather than this is the campgrounds page, let's put a welcome message. Welcome to YelpCamp. Feel free to put whatever content you want. And I'll also add in a paragraph. In the paragraph, I'll add just a little kind of tagline. And I'll just say, view our hand-picked campgrounds from all over the world. Something like that. Doesn't really matter. We'll save, refresh. Okay, so now we have our little tagline. And the last thing we want to do is take care of this link, the add new campground link. So I'm going to copy that and also put that inside the Jumbotron. However, I'm going to make it into a button, one of the Bootstrap buttons. So to do that, I'm going to add a paragraph first and then put the anchor tag inside of that. And I'm doing that just for spacing. We want this to be on its own line. And then I'm going to give the button a class, multiple classes of BTN, BTN primary for the color, and BTN dash large, like that. And we'll save. And now we have our add a new campground button. We click on it and it takes us to the form. That's completely unstyled. One minor thing is that if I resize this window here, notice how our text goes right up against the edge of the Jumbotron, which isn't great. We have some spacing here and I want to keep that spacing. What we'll need to do is just add another container inside the Jumbotron. So div class equals container, and then down here inside the Jumbotron before the end, we'll add the closing div and then just indent everything. And now if we refresh, it should look the same, but when we shrink it down, we now have some space there. Okay, so that's the header part. Now we want to work on the grid of images. And I'll be upfront with you, it's definitely a little bit more work. Okay, so let's get started on that grid. And we're going to start by creating a row. So div class equals row, just like that. And I'm going to start with just a little message here. So we're going to add a div class equals, and I'm going to make this just take up the entire width. And we're just going to have a message here, an H3, that says our most popular sites or campgrounds. And it won't look like much for now. So let's head back over and let's start by adding in div class row, which we need. Everything in our grid needs to go in a row. So div class equals row, just like that. And now we have to talk about this for each loop, because what we actually want to do is inside of our grid, inside the row, for each campground, we want to make a div that has a column class and a column width using the Bootstrap grid. So I'm going to do that now, where I'm going to put all of this code, this for each loop, I'm going to indent it just like that. And then we need our closing div tag here. So this is for the class equals row, and this is for the container. Okay, so we have div class row, and rather than just leaving this content as a div in here with an h4 and an image, we will still have an image, but we're going to change this div so that it has a class of column medium 3 and column small 6. And that's just to make it responsive so that we get some bigger images when the screen size is larger, and then when we shrink it down, it will go down to just 2 images per row, and then it will shrink even further down to just 1 image per row. So inside of that, we're actually going to add in another div, and this div is going to have class of thumbnail, which is a Bootstrap class, which will help us make a little card. It will make a little grid item. Inside that thumbnail, we'll add the image to start, just like that, where we have image source is equal to the campground URL. And we'll just leave it at that, and I'm going to get rid of this for now and just save, and let's see what we get. If we refresh, all right, so we have a grid of images now. There's only 3, but we're getting this grid, and I'll show you what I meant by making it responsive. So as I shrink these, notice how it changes to 2 squares or 2 items across the screen. Remember that there's 12 units. So what we had first, we were dividing it into 4 chunks where they each took up 3 units. And then when the grid gets smaller, right here, they each take up 6 units. And even smaller, it automatically goes to 1. And we didn't have to write that because the extra small default is to use 12 units. So we didn't have to specify that. Now let's get the title back in, this campground name. And rather than just an h4, I'm going to do another Bootstrap class, a div class equals caption, just like that. And then inside there, we'll put an h4 with the campground name. Okay, let's save. Let's see what that looks like. There we go. We get these nice little cards. This is the thumbnail class making that for us. We have our images, and let's just see what it looks like if we have a bunch of images going and a bunch of items. So you don't have to do this, but I'm going to paste this in here and just give us some more data. It will be duplicate data, but that's fine. And then we need to make sure we add the correct commas in. So comma there and a comma there. Now, if we refresh, oh, we need to restart the server anytime we mess with the app.js. And now if we refresh, you'll see we have a small problem. Our grid is a little bit messed up. And what's happening is that we have images that are of different heights. So this Salmon Creek one is different than these two, even though the widths are the same in this case, and that's throwing off the grid. And there's an easy way to fix it, although it's a little bit wonky, and I'll show you how we do that. Inside of our campgrounds.ejs, on the div class row, I'm going to add in a style attribute. And I'm just going to do this temporarily. We'll be moving this to an external style sheet, but I'm going to just do it inline to make it easier for you to see. So we set style to be display flex and flex wrap to be wrap. And those are 2 properties that are going to help our grid out. So if I refresh now, we end up with a grid where it's more flexible. It doesn't matter that we have some different heights because now the grid adapts. So there's more space between these two than there is here. Basically, it figures out the minimum amount of space needed where we can have everything be on its own line together where we can have everything be aligned perfectly. And there's one other change we can make, which is to go back and add in text center, which is a Bootstrap class, which will make just our text centered right there. And I think that looks a little bit better, also a matter of personal preference. And now we're done with the Campgrounds page for the time being. Hopefully that showed you how Bootstrap can really help us out, can make things pretty easy, especially compared to doing this from scratch. And let me just show you our nice responsive grid that we have. So this is on mobile. We get this nice layout all the way up to 4 images going across. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with how this looks. I'll see you in the next video.